Today I want to show you how to make this block using your crumb fabrics. Hi, I'm Kim Jamison Hurst of Chatterbox Quilts, and today we are going to be working with our crumb fabrics and a solid interior piece that's going to form the inside of that block. So it looks a little different than some of the other crumb blocks you might have seen, but this particular one here, I started off with a 5.5-inch square for the center, and then I've added my crumb fabrics around it in patches. You'll see what I mean in a minute about that. And it's come out to this pretty big block. This is about 11.5 inches. Of course, it's not trimmed down yet. Something else I want to mention to you. So listen at the end. I will explain what you can do with this block when it's finished. And I thought this is a little bit bigger than I probably want to work with. So today I want to show you how to make this block using a smaller center, because the center is what really drives the whole project as far as how big it's going to be when you finish. And so I'm starting with a 3.5-inch center. And then I need to grab some of my crumb fabrics, okay? So crumb fabrics, if you don't know what those are, check up above or in the description below, because I have several videos on crumb fabrics, but the one I'm sharing with you is actually how to make that fabric. I have other blocks I've made from crumb fabric, but you'll need to know how to make the fabric first before you can do anything else. So I've got my pieces here. Now, because this is a 4-sided piece in the center, I'm going to need, let me think, 4 different pieces of crumb fabric. And as you move around that center, you're going to need bigger pieces because the block starts expanding, right? So the first thing I want to do is make sure I've got big enough pieces that are going to work with this. So that piece I can see is longer or wider than the width of that block. So that's going to be okay. Then I've got this one, which is going to, we'll have cut this off a bit, but it's going to be a little bit bigger, right? So I've got this piece, which I think should work okay. All these pieces are getting longer, okay? So that should also work. I've got lots of room there on that one. And then I've got this ginormous piece here. So that should definitely work, all right? So I want to make sure I keep those in that order so I don't get mixed up and then find out that this is the last one I have and it's definitely not going to fit on that last area there. So the next thing I want to do is go to the sewing machine and show you how I put these together and how I trim them as I go around, because you're going to have to do that. And then we're going to discuss near the end of the video what you can do with this type of block. So meet me at the sewing machine. So I'm going to be sewing these together with a 1/4-inch seam. Now, we started with this square, but that doesn't mean that you have to keep that shape as that perfect square. Now, how would you change that, you're going to ask? Well, you change that by how you add these pieces on. So let's take the first one and put it on a bit of an angle. I'm going to start in the corner there, but I'm going to angle it just a little bit, okay? And then when I'm sewing it on, I'm going to sew along that crumb fabric piece, not along the square, but along the crumb fabric, because that's going to give you that nice angle. Okay, so here we are with that piece. Now, I'm using a white fabric in the center, kind of obvious, I suppose. Usually I would want to press my pieces towards that center piece because there are no seams there, right? But because it's white, I'm afraid that if I do that, and I'm using some black fabric here too, that you might get some shadow of the fabric through there, and I don't want that. So I'm going to actually press them out towards the crumb fabric. You can either use your iron, or I'm using this Violet Craft seam roller to do that. And then I need to trim this, okay? So I do need to trim it along the sides of the square. So this side's fine, it looks good, but you can see that we've got some extra fabric hanging off there, so I need to trim that. And I like to flip it over because then I can actually line my ruler up along the edge. So I'm using my Martelli 12-inch by 12-inch cutting mat and their rotary cutter and one of their little no-slip rulers. There we go. And I'm just going to trim that right off like that, okay? So we can use that for another crumb piece in the future. So there we go. There's our first one there. Okay, looks like a gnome to me. Almost. Okay, let's keep going, shall we? So piece number 2. Here's our piece number 2. So remember, I want to make sure it's long enough. Oh, look at that. It's just long enough. Okay, it just fits, which is good because I know that it will not fit anywhere else on this project except here. I know it's not going to be big enough for the bottom for sure. So let's get it together. Okay, we'll just put them together like this, and if I have to trim a little bit off there, one side or the other, it's not going to be a big problem. But the one thing I didn't take into account is, do I want to have this straight like that, or do I want to have it come across a little bit? So at this point in time, I need to make that decision. So if I want it to come over here, we need to move this all the way up here, and let's do something sort of like that. So I'm coming down, I'm going to be stitching on this piece, which gives me a little bit of an angle there. Okay. Okay, so here we go. Again, we can press that out. Starting to see all these colors come into play here now. Okay, so I've got that there. Now, one thing I want to point out to you now here, we've done this on a bit of an angle. You can see this angle starting to happen as opposed to, you know, these kind of wonky angles as opposed to these nice straight ones. And you can see here that we're coming across, but then, you know, we're going up in this angle, which we can't have that, okay? Because when we go to sew our next piece on, we're not going to be able to line this piece up with, you know, fabric that isn't there. So what I need to do now is I need to do a little bit of trimming there. All right. So we're going to do a little bit of trimming because you can see that we could not keep this angle like that. That's just not going to work. All right. So what I want to do is I want to take it down at the far corner here of that little square block, and we're going to match it up to the top one there. So we're actually going to change up our center square slightly. Okay. Not a big deal. Whoops. But what is a big deal is, don't pull my fabric. There we go. Cutting at the sewing machine is not something I ever do, except for my demos. So it's always a little bit awkward for me to get through some of those seams. Okay, so here we go. We got 1, 2. Now we need to move around 3 and 4, right? Okay, so next side here is going to be this piece here. Okay, and that's nice and long. We've got lots of room there. So what we need to figure out is, because we're going to be cutting it off here, right, is do I want it to look like this, basically? Or do I want to keep more of the orange in and cut it like that? Ooh, it's a tough decision. This or that. Okay, I overthink everything. We're going to go with the orange. We're going to stick with the orange. Aren't you glad I decided to do that? Ha ha ha. Okay, I'm going to put that up there and stitch along there. And sometimes this happens where my seam gets flipped back and I'm not even going to worry about it. What I am going to worry about is making sure that I'm stitching along on the other piece of fabric. All right. So you heard what I was talking about when my seam got flipped there. I'm not going to worry about that. There's so many seams in here, you're not even going to notice that at all. Okay, so this guy is going to get pressed out to this side. And actually, if you have your iron, that's really the best way to go with these because there's so many seams. It's hard to press it down with the seam roller, got to admit. But for the sake of brevity, we'll just use the seam roller and get it down. And you can see there's just a little sliver of fabric showing in there. That's the fun when you do things with crumb fabric, because you get these little itsy bitsy pieces that show up, which is kind of interesting. You never know quite what you're going to get. All right, so let's square this up as well. So this time I'm just going to go right down here along that piece, I think. Although, you know, I'm going to look at some of the seams here and stuff too. So I would be okay. I'd be just going through there, but I might even angle this just a little bit to get a little bit more of that orange if I can in there. A lot on the fly decisions when you're doing these kinds of projects, and that's part of the fun of it. I have to start standing to put enough weight on things when I'm cutting it. Okay, there's a nice little piece. That can go in another project, right? Okay, so this is what we're looking at right now. Okay, looking pretty interesting, I'd say. We got one more piece to put on, one more side that needs to be covered. And that's this one here. And so here, you see I've got this huge piece here. So again, we'll have to make a decision here. Do we want to have, you know, a lot of this green showing? Do we want to move it over here? Do we want to move it in like this? I am going to go like this because I think this is cool. I don't need any more green in there. I don't need that in there, I don't think. But having the orange there is kind of cool. So we're going to put that on there. Stitch that down. Alrighty. All right, there we go. All these little bits of fabric that show up. Look at this little tiny piece there, really cool. Okay, just kind of fun. Okay, so we've got another side to trim here, and actually, I know it looks rather strange, but I'm going to leave it right now, and I'm going to go back to the cutting table and trim it up because I need to do some trimming all the way around here. So we're going to go back to the cutting table and do that. All right, here's my block, and it doesn't really look like a quilt block yet, does it? But don't worry, we're going to trim it up so it's going to look just fine. Now, to do that, the easiest way I've found is to use my Martelli square fussing cut windows. They come in different sets. This one goes from 6.5 inches to 9.5 inches, and I think 6.5 inches would be a good size for this particular block. So let me show you how this works. I'm going to put it in here. This is a frame, okay? And then inside, I'm going to put one of the no-slip square templates. They come in sets as well. And when I found what I want, the way I want to cut it, I'm just going to drop that in the center, take off the frame, and then I can cut. But I'm not quite there yet. I'm still thinking. So we could do it a lot of different ways. The only thing you have to be careful of is that there's fabric within that frame. So we could actually tilt it if we wanted to some degree. There we go. We could do something like that. We could have it more kind of square where this looks more centered. I don't think we're going to be able to change it very much like this because we're going to run out of space here and up here for the fabric. So why don't we see if we can turn it again a little bit like this and make sure I've got fabric in there to see where the top is. That's my one part to worry about there. This little green guy here. Okay, so we could do something like that. That's kind of interesting, right? Can I even shift it a little bit more? All right, so I think that's kind of interesting. I think that's kind of cool. I think we could actually move this up just a bit. Get a few more fabrics in there. Okay, I like that. That's good. So I'm going to take my 6.5 inch no slip square template, drop that in, take that out, and then we're going to trim this all up. Sure, I got that one. Yes, I did. Good. Okay. So there we go. There's lots of crumb fabric left over for another project, right? And there's our little square, okay? So that is going to come out to a 6.5 inch square, so it's ready to go into a project. But I also wanted to talk to you about what else you can do with this, because I did mention that at the beginning of the video. So you could take something like this. You'll notice this is not square, right? It's got 4 sides, but it's not a square. All right, so you could take something like this. You could piece it into your project. You have to have some coping strips in there to make sure it all fits together well. Or you could use it as an applique. Okay, I always go to applique instead of piecing. That's just me. But I think you could definitely take this, plunk it down on, you know, just some plain background, maybe even the same fabric as the center, and then you could just do a zigzag stitch or a blanket stitch, whatever you prefer, around the outside of it. You could use practically any color thread because you've got lots of different colors to choose from in here, or maybe even invisible thread, and you could have that down on your project. So there's different ways you can use this particular block, different sizes you can make it. It all starts with that center square and builds out from there. Thanks so much for watching today. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to share it with your quilting friends. And remember to subscribe and hit the bell so you'll be notified the next time I release a new video. And before you go, check out these other videos I've included just for you. For more helpful quilting information, be sure to go to my website at www.chatterboxquilts.com.